In this lesson, we're going to learn about the Carolina colony, which is part of the southern colonies. We've already talked about the southern colonies in some degree when we talked about Virginia. Before we get to this, I'd think about some of the characteristics of the Virginia colony that we learned, so perhaps they will become familiar as we learn about it. Before we get to the new material of the southern colonies, let's review what we learned about the middle colonies. The middle colonies, once again, would encompass Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, parts of Delaware, and Maryland. The middle colonies were known for their great diversity, which was different than the colonies such as the New England colonies, where there was little diversity, because if you differed from the Pilgrims or the Puritans, you were deemed a dissenter and you were kicked out. So some of this diversity in the middle colonies can be exhibited by Dutch in New York, Swedes in Delaware, English Puritans, those that founded the middle colonies, at least the proprietor, William Penn, was a Quaker, and the Quakers' beliefs led in some degree to the diversity in the middle colonies. The Quakers believed that everyone had an inner light or inner goodness, and they never really viewed any groups as negative or inferior. This promoted religious tolerance and good relations with the natives. This attracts other groups to the region, which leads to this great diversity of people and religions in the middle colonies. Of course, we went over that William Penn was granted the payment of a debt in the form of the land that would be Pennsylvania. That had to do with the restoration of Charles II to the throne. Penn became a proprietor and could name the governor of the colonies. There is William Penn. Pennsylvania, although it would have great diversity, was a colony that was founded on the purpose of profits, or a proprietary colony. This is also a characteristic of the southern colonies. Its good harbors and fertile fields would lead to its prosperity. Pennsylvania grew the grain that would be made into bread that fed the colonies, and it became known as the breadbasket of the colonies. The southern colonies will have similarities to both the middle and Virginia, which actually was a southern colony. We will get into those in just a few minutes. First of all, Carolina, which would become the most wealthy of the southern colonies, was granted to 8 people in the year 1663, just like Pennsylvania was granted to William Penn, for help with Charles II reascending the throne in the Restoration. Now we can see where Carolina was quite large. All of this was the land that was granted to these individuals who helped Charles II reascend the throne during the Restoration. These 8 individuals that would receive Carolina from the king in payment of a debt owed to their family because they helped King Charles II reascend the throne that was lost by his father, Charles I, and Oliver Cromwell took over the rule of England as Lord Protector. Well, the English people desired Charles II, the son of Charles I, back, and several English nobles backed him. One of those was William Penn's father, and the other was the family of these 8 Lords Proprietors. Now, these Lords Proprietors, which I will show you on the following slides, they were granted Carolina by the king because he knew Carolina could make them money and it would be a suitable way to pay the debt. Now, the 8 Lords Proprietors planned on making money on the Carolinas by charging what's known as quitrent. Quitrent is an annual rent on the land. So the motive of the Lords Proprietors was to make money, and the way that they were going to make money was to charge a rent on the land. For that, they would need renters. We will get to how they attract renters as soon as we meet the 8 Lords Proprietors. Here are the 8 Lords Proprietors that were granted Carolina from Charles II to make money and as a payoff from the debt. You may notice some of the names because they are also the names of some places in South Carolina. Albemarle, Ashley Cooper, 2 rivers named after him. Berkeley, there's a Berkeley County. These are some of the ones that I recognize myself. You may recognize more. Well, there were some characteristics that would bring settlers to the Carolinas. South Carolina had many valuable natural resources. It also had land that was fertile from which you could grow crops. It had a mild climate, which also is conducive to growing crops. And it had many rivers and streams for transportation, fishing, and other things, or many waterways. However, this alone is not going to be enough to attract people to the Carolinas. And the Lords Proprietors, knowing that these things existed in the Carolinas, wouldn't be enough either, because they have to make it known in England that they have this rental property that they are willing to rent out to tenants. So the Lords Proprietors knew they had a valuable property, knew they could make a lot of money from renting it, but they need some help with the logistics of this. And what they do is they go to one of the smartest men in England, the one that wrote about the social contract and the natural rights of people. And luckily, this is the time that, does anybody know who I'm talking about? Yes, John Locke is in England. And they commissioned John Locke to come up with a system of policies by which to govern the Carolinas, and also to make these presentable as to attract people to the Carolinas. So John Locke takes up their offer, and gets to work on a document which would form the basis of government in the Carolinas, as well as attract people to the Carolinas. This document was known as the Fundamental Constitutions of Carolinas. Now, John Locke, in his discussion with the Loras proprietors, had to understand their main motive for settling the Carolinas. And he's like, okay, what's your motive here, Loras proprietors? And they're like, we want to make money. He's like, okay, making money it is. He says, so you know what? If you want to make money, you need as many renters as possible. So you cannot limit people settling in this area. So don't be like the Pilgrims or Puritans who kick out dissenters. You need to allow many religions. Catholics, Protestants, Jewish people, anyone that's willing to come and meets other qualifications can come. He says you need to have, just like Pennsylvania, you need to have religious tolerance in the Carolinas. And they're like, excellent idea, Mr. Locke. Religious tolerance would be fantastic, because religious tolerance means that we are not limiting who will rent from us. Good job. Okay, we don't need you. Locke's like, hold on a minute now. That's not quite, I don't think we're done yet. He's like, why are people going to want to come here? He's like, because we have land. He's like, yeah. Are you going to sell them the land? Yeah. He's like, that's not a good idea. After all, you want to charge quit rent. You're going to sell them the land and charge them rent. Says, do you have a better idea, Mr. Locke? You are really smart. John Locke said, yes. Let's do what they did in Virginia. Let's give them land if they can provide for their own passage to America. Said, I've heard about this method. What is it called? Ah, you're talking about, it's on the tip of my tongue, it starts with an H. It's called the something method. Yes, that's it. The Headright method. Yes, you're talking about instituting the Headright method. Free land for coming to America. He's like, yes, tell them you're going to give them the land, but you can still charge them a quit rent on the land. Excellent idea, Mr. Locke. Due to the fact that there is no more land to be had in Britain, because the nobles own it and other rich people, those who can't afford the land will want to take advantage of this opportunity like they did in Virginia. He said, yes, let's not stop there. They're like, keep talking, Mr. Locke. You have definitely earned your money. Said, well, we're going to advertise to people that if they come over here with the Headright method, that they're not only going to be landowners, that they're going to be elites. They're going to be above commoners. They're going to be wealthy landowners. He said, in fact, let's even tell them that they may become the royalty of America, and we will grant them titles. So not only will they assume land that would be unattainable in Britain, but they're also going to be titles like the Duke of Horry County or the Baron of Charlestown. Excellent idea, Mr. Locke. Excellent. Get to work on that document. He goes, yes, if I think of anything else, I'll tell you. Well, he never thought of anything else. But the fundamental constitutions of the Carolinas would become the document by which the Carolinas were governed and It would also serve as a sort of advertisement poster to attract people here. Things went according to John Locke and the Lord Proprietor's plans, and people came to the Carolinas in great numbers. And just like in Virginia, the institution of the headright method, and because of what was described in Virginia, this led to large plantations being in the Carolinas. And on those large plantations, they grew cash crops. So, just like in Virginia, another southern colony, characteristics of the southern colonies were the headright method, large plantations, cash crops. Of course, those plantations need a labor source, and in Virginia it was who that were trading their journey over here for a period of service. Yes, indentured servants. Well, in South Carolina it would become slaves. We will talk about that. The cash crops that were grown in the Carolinas were rice and indigo. Now, some of the earliest people to take advantage of the headright method, the offer that was set forth in the fundamental constitutions of the Carolinas, were people from the Caribbean island of where we've already talked about it, the one where Rihanna came from. Yes, the people from Barbados. Some of the earliest South Carolinians were British that were leaving the island of Barbados for a better opportunity in the Carolinas. Now the thing is, in Barbados, they already had an established slave system, and those settlers that were relocating to the Carolinas would bring slavery with them and the slave system that they had mastered in Barbados. Let's take a look at some of the slides before we come back to this paper and finish it. So, once again, South Carolina was founded as a proprietary colony, like all the other southern colonies, when it was granted land to 8 Lords Proprietors by King Charles II. They wanted to charge a quit rent on the land. In order to do that, they needed renters. To attract these renters, they hired John Locke to write the fundamental constitutions of Carolina. This document would include policies such as religious tolerance and others designed to attract settlers. There's the Lord Proprietors again. Here's just a page of the fundamental constitutions of the Carolinas written by John Locke. This document was sort of an advertisement to attract renters to the Carolinas. There's John Locke. I should have showed that before I taught it to you as a review. You remember him from last year. South Carolina was designed to establish a social class system by granting titles. It was never carried out, though. But it shows South Carolina was to be based on the elites, not necessarily religion, because basing on religion would limit your renters. To encourage settlers, the proprietors set up the headright method, which, just like in Virginia, led to the creation of large plantations based on cash crops. The first settlers in South Carolina were from Barbados, which was also a British colony. We learned about it. South Carolina was referred to as a colony of a colony because many of the people that came here were from another British colony, Barbados. This is where South Carolina received its first slave system, and slavery would make plantation owners very wealthy. Due to the open arms to anyone willing to pay rent to the lord's proprietors, other settlers came from France, Switzerland, Germany, Scotland, and Ireland. South Carolina was designed to establish I had some double slides in there. Please ignore that part. So here's Barbados and here is South Carolina, and you can see how tiny Barbados is and why there's little opportunities for land here. So the opportunity for more land led to these people from Barbados coming to the Carolinas. There's a enlarged picture of Barbados. This shows many of the diverse peoples that came to the Carolinas, including British Barbadians, French, Scotch, Ireland, German, people from Switzerland. Religious choice brings French Huguenots, which already tried to establish a colony here, but they came back, Jewish settlers. Carolina had natural resources, fertile land, mild climate, and many waterways, all that contributed to the development of the colony through plantations and prosperity. The last part is about the early government of South Carolina, which consisted of a governor and a grand council, which gave Carolina some degree of democracy from the beginning. Like most other British colonies, in fact, there was some degree of democracy in the Carolina colony from the beginning, and South Carolina's early government would show this. The early government consisted of a governor and the legislative body, the Representative Assembly, which was called the Grand Council. Does anybody remember what it was called in Virginia? Yes, it was called the House of Burgesses. The Grand Council was made up of 3 groups. It was made up of representatives of the proprietors, the Carolina elite, and those with the smallest amount of representatives were the common people. We will talk more about this in future lessons. Until then, thank you for listening. I hope you did well.